It all began when I met her that cold night in my office. She walked in like she owned the place, as I was going over some old cases and reminiscing.
You don't think we'd spoil the whole animation right away, did you? Hello and welcome to PolyCosm. My name's Christina, and since Inktob, I mean Daily Ink Artwork Month, is right around the corner, for this week's video, we'll be creating an animated Noir Style 9-panel storyboard by combining both 2D images and 3D assets in Blender with the help of an ink shader created by Darth Shader. We'll start off with Omrajan's process and how he sketched out the initial storyboard and concept piece for the detective's office. We'll then move on to my process of creating the full environment in Blender by kitbashing using the Sketchfab add-on, then applying a fantastic new ink shader pack created by the wonderful Mathieu Suck. I don't know how to pronounce that. I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing it wrong. Also known as Darth Shader. I just love that name. I'll then set up a bunch of cameras to match our original storyboard page and save out some renders for Omrajan to use as reference while drawing in some noir style characters. Lastly, I'll take those characters, add them to our camera shots, and work on the camera movements and renders. Whew, that's a lot. Right, Omrajan, you take over.
To start our project, I wrote a rough script and a shot list of what I had in mind. The main idea in my head was a hard-boiled film noir story that centers around a typical Lovecraftian mystery. I knew I wanted the scene to take place in our main character's office, so I also drew a floor plan for reference. Then, I roughly sketched out these storyboards to help me visualize each shot. I passed these over to Christina so she can get started on the environment and then get the renders for each shot. So, I'll let her take over now.
Alright, time for some kitbashing. I find this type of stuff so much easier to do with concept references, like the ones Omrajan has provided me. This process is fairly straightforward. I drag and drop the layout reference of the room and started dropping in assets through the Sketchfab add-on, which is completely free. I honestly can't recommend it enough. Most of the Sketchfab models have something called a standard license, which means, quote, you may use the 3D asset worldwide on all types of media for all types of use, whether commercial or non-commercial, in all types of derivative works. So in essence, as long as you aren't reselling the 3D models or selling any scenes containing other people's models, unless authorized by the creator of course, you should be in the clear. As you can see, I'm following Omrajan's sketch for guidance and blocking out the major models first, like the couch, desk, bookcase, and so on. The key with making the outline for the ink shader work as optimally as possible is to have clean geometry, so scans are sort of out of the picture. If the mesh looks clean, fairly low poly, and optimized in solid mode in the viewport, you're probably alright. If it turns out to not work, you can always just switch out the model later on. No worries. So, like I mentioned in the beginning, for this project we'll be using an ink shader blender pack created by Darth Shader. It can be found on Blender Market via the link in the description and pinned comment. And for anyone watching this video, if you use the promo code Inkwood-PolyCosm, the first 100 people to use the code will get 5% off. The shader pack is super versatile and ships with a few presets that are super easy to customize. Seeing how next month is Daily Ink Artwork Month, like I mentioned, this is perfect for any 3D artist wanting to participate, or if you maybe want to combine some 2D, 3D like we're doing in this video. Go grab a pack, it's great, honestly. The key with interiors like this is to think about the story. Interiors, just like a character's appearance or wardrobe choice, can tell you a lot about them. Ask yourself, just with simple forms and no texture applied, how can you tell that story through a 3D environment? For this environment, I was thinking of having case file boxes scattered all around the room and file cabinet drawers open. Maybe our detective is a bit of a scatterbrain. When he gets fixated on something, he gets obsessive, opening drawers, scattering papers, and so on. Just thinking about getting to the bottom of the case and not really caring about the mess he's creating. And take the radio I added in. I added that on top of the boxes. Perhaps he plays this while he's looking through the files as a way of thinking clearer? Little moments like that scattered all over the room will add a lot of personality. In the end, we didn't really end up seeing a lot of these things, but I personally think this type of set dressing is super fun to do and it's actually really good practice. Alright, after spending a couple of hours kit bashing, this is what I had in the end. At this point, I wanted to add the ink shader, so Omerjan and I went through all of the different styles, and in the end we actually decided on Durink plus the outline material. We thought that style would be the easiest to replicate for the characters Omerjan would be drawing into the scene, and also we thought it just looked really cool. Back over in Blender, I selected all of the models with A, went to the material panel, and after getting rid of all the material slots, I pressed the little arrow button key and chose Copy Material to Selected. This basically copies the non-existent materials to all of the models, so they'll all have no materials. Then I went into File, Append, and chose our ink shader file. In Materials, I chose both the Durink and Outline. Then I selected one model, added the Durink material in a new slot by pressing the plus button, then added the ink outline material in a new slot, hit A again, and chose to copy material to selected again. The ink shader needed a lot of adjusting, but before I got to that, I needed to add the outline by individually selecting the different models and adding a solidify modifier. In the settings panel, choose to flip the normals and write in 1 for both the material offset and rim. We can adjust the thickness of the line art by adjusting the thickness up here. Different models will generate different results every time, so sometimes you might need to go into the negative direction for the lines to look the best. Before doing anything else, Mathieu, I really hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, recommends changing the view transform setting under color management to standard and look to none. This is to kind of avoid the shader looking blown out. It's also worth noting that any HDRI in the scene will affect the shader, as well as any lights in the scene, so just be wary of that. Okay, so this is sort of an annoying process to do on each individual mesh in the scene. So what I like to do is group things that kind of belong together. Take the bookcase as an example. We can join the books with the bookcase itself. Often when you import Sketchfab models, all of the models will be parented to an empty. So in order to group these, we right-click the empty in the scene inspector, choose select hierarchy, and then you need to shift select a part of the model in the viewport. Hit Ctrl J to join them and Alt P to unparent them from the empty. But make sure you hit Keep Transformations. In the inspector, you can see that we now have just one joined mesh. We can now delete the rest of the empties. Also, if your origin point moves, you can right click and move the origin point to the middle of the mesh. I find this way of working just much tidier. And now if I add the two shaders and the solidify modifier, adjust the settings, and voila! Imagine having to do this with each individual book. God. Much easier to join it all into one mesh. Alright, back to the scene. I'm basically just repeating what I just showed to you guys and grouping things here and there. When I was done, it was time to bring a test light source and start adjusting the shader a bit more. As you can see, the Durink material shader has a lot of settings, so you can make the lines more wavy, straight, tightly packed, loose, etc. You can also change the color if you want to go for a proper stylized look. Ah, this is so cool. It was really fun to just play around and see what kind of effects I could get. So when it comes to light, any light in the scene will produce white graphic shapes, so I wanted to use that strategically to frame the characters very dramatically. This is a noir style storyboard after all. In the end, this is how the scene looked. I wanted strong lights to come through the door and blinds, creating super graphic striped shapes in the scene, as well as light from the desk lamp and outside corridor. I actually found this model on Sketchfab of this girl with hands on her hips, so I actually just used that for the silhouette in the glass of the door. I just tweaked her silhouette in sculpt mode and cheesed it a bit by sizing her down to make the silhouette fit the light being cast onto the floor. But yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it for this part. I basically just followed the storyboard Omerjan drew and tried to match those camera angles as best as I could. I also added in a few reference models in some of the shots, so Omerjan can kind of get an idea of like how foreshortened the characters would get, but also how the light shadow parts of the models would look. This was just to kind of make it easier for Omerjan to draw the characters into the scenes. Alright, Omerjan, back to you.
Alright, so I got the renders from Christina for each individual shot. I'm going to create a new layer over them, fill that with an off-white color, and then lower the opacity for that layer. I start sketching on another new layer on top of that, focusing on the characters' gestures first. As I flesh out their sketch, I need to constantly keep in mind their relevant scale to the environment. In some of the shots, Christina also provided me with a version where she has placed a figure for reference. This helps me with certain dramatic angles, as the perspective can get tricky with the distortion of the camera. In these cases, I'm avoiding drawing over the 3D figure and instead using that alternative render as a reference to compare my sketch to. I'm not personally a fan of drawing over 3D models in general, and I think I'm going to make a video in the future explaining why drawing over can create problems and why I prefer to avoid that method. Once I'm happy with the sketch, I start going over it with my final ink layer. At this stage, I need to try to match the style of the renders to some degree. I want the characters to pop out a little bit while retaining the ink-shaded look. We're also trying to imitate the film noir style, so using dramatic light and shadow shapes do really help with that as well. While using graphic shadow shapes, I am also imitating the diagonal line work you see in the shader in parts for the characters. At this point, I think I should talk more about the specific style we are going for. Our aim here was to use the Inkwood shader for a film noir style storyboard. Film noirs from early 20th century used a very stylized approach when it comes to shadow and light. They tend to have very dramatic lighting scenarios that create scenes that have a lot of contrast. This style creates a foreboding atmosphere and reinforces the mystery elements. I have been a fan of film noir since I was a kid, and blending this style with a Lovecraftian horror mystery was a no-brainer for me. The Inkwood shader helped us get the required visuals as efficiently as possible and really sped up our workflow. We are working with a fairly limited number of shots for this scene, so we had to make each shot count. When you're storyboarding, clarity should be your first aim. Even as a really rough sketch, your board needs to communicate the shot in a clear and concise manner. As a whole, the audience needs to clearly understand where the characters are, their relationship to each other, and the flow of the scene. How you place the camera and what you focus on can tell a lot about the characters themselves and their motivations. For example, in this scene, we have our femme fatale standing up and our detective is sitting down. The camera is high up, looking down with the femme fatale clearly dominating the scene. She clearly has some power over our protagonist. Since our aim is to have an animated storyboard at the end, I need to think about using different layers for different elements. I consult with Christina quite a bit at this stage, since she can tell me how she's going to use the planes to create the animated sections. As per her request, sometimes I need to draw more than what actually would be visible, so when the camera moves around, the characters won't look like cardboard cutouts. Having different elements like the statue and her hand drawn on separate layers will also help with the animation. Remember to take the time and plan your approach before starting out if you want to try this out yourselves. Okay, I'm pretty much done with these right now. Just going to spend some extra time going over them to clean them up, and then proceed to saving each layer out as a PNG without a background. As you are saving each individual layer out, I suggest naming them in an organized manner to make your life easier. And now we go back to Christina to see how she's going to put this all together.
Yay, time to add in the characters. As per usual when importing images with transparent backgrounds, I use the add-on Import Images as Planes, which can be found in the Add-ons tab in Preferences. I organized the different shots by different folders and imported the relevant images according to said folders. This process is pretty straightforward. You just import the different layers and arrange them in the scene. Because the characters were drawn at a certain camera angle, I had to make sure to kind of match that camera angle and not drift too far from the initial shot, or they would just look distorted and weird. Another thing I did to have the images appear in full brightness and not get affected by any light in the scene, I used a mix shader and mixed both an emission shader, which I fed the original texture into, with a transparent shader. This is how that node setup looked like for each individual image plane. I basically just copied the middle parts and pasted them into every image material setup. For some of the images, I had to cut off parts, like the hand holding the cigarette here, and have that imported as a separate image. Because of the angle, the image was clipping through the desk, but when I raised it, the body wasn't extended far enough down, so I sort of had to cheese it here. This did sort of help with getting a better parallax effect though, so it kind of worked out. Alright, now that each shot was set up, it was time to start rendering. Ooh, you guys ready for the final product? I sure am. Let's watch it.
It all began when I met her that cold night in my office. She walked in like she owned the place, as I was going over some old cases and reminiscing. She said her brother mysteriously disappeared shortly after coming back from an academic trip. He hasn't been himself since he got back, and he brought with him this strange statue. She didn't have much for me to go on, except that eerie thing and her brother's research files back at his apartment. You know, this whole thing seemed wrong from the beginning, but I just couldn't turn her down. No, not her. I asked her to take me to her brother's apartment. And as we left my office, I could feel that damned idol's gaze on my back, watching us go.
Here you can see the final storyboards laid out in the same fashion as the roughs. You can see how the rough sketches provide a template to work with, but we didn't necessarily felt like we had to recreate the exact idea for each scene. Thanks to Mathieu Sack for his wonderful Inkwood shader. And I hope I got the pronunciation for your name correct. I actually had to Google it and practice it for a while, so I'm hoping it was close. It was a blast to play around with this shader pack, so yeah, once again, thank you very much. You can buy the shader pack by clicking the link in the description. We'd also would like to thank our friend Daniel for lending his voice acting talent. You can see his contact info on the screen and down in the description below. If you need a classically trained voice actor, you should get in touch with him. That's it for this week, everyone. We hope you enjoyed this video and found it useful. Feel free to ask any questions you might have in the comments section. Thanks for watching, and remember to be careful if anyone asks you to investigate a mysterious disappearance linked to a Great Old One statue. See you next week!